Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Boot Nerds podcast. My name is Jim. Jay, what's going on?
I'm all good. I hope you're good as well. Basically, FYI, this is a retake of the intro because the previous one I messed up. I said some stupid stuff. So yeah, let's just get that out of the way. If you haven't subscribed to the Boot Nerds podcast already, of course, don't forget to do that. Leave a like on the video if you're going to have a good time. And don't forget that if you have any questions for us, you should leave them in the comment section right down below. Now, Jim, what do we have for people today?
Today we have a pretty interesting topic, especially for the boot nerds out there. And I'm assuming if you are subscribed to this podcast and listening to us talk for an hour about pretty much nonsense most of the time, you probably have an interest in football boot technologies.
Otherwise, it would be relatively like, we appreciate you being here, but I'm not really sure I would 100% understand. Like some comments said, we do also sometimes talk about luxury watches and stuff, but it's not really like, it's the Boot Nerds podcast. So it's gonna be a nice one. This is basically why we're here, right?
Yeah. So what I thought it would be interesting to talk about is highlighting the most important football boot technologies of all time, like starting from very early football boots to really, I would say, over the last 10 years where football boot technology has become a huge thing. And there's been a few pieces of tech in particular that I think have had a huge influence on the entire market. So I guess there's only one logical place to start. And that is, even though it's not really viewed as a high-tech boot, I think the Copa Mundial is kind of a huge breakthrough.
I think we need to go further back.
Further back.
I think we need to go back to 1952, 53 and 54, because back then, Adidas and PUMA, they both claim to have had the first screw-in stud football boot used by some of their athletes. So in the World Cup of 1954, Adidas claimed that before the final, it was pouring down. Germany were playing against Hungary, and Adidas then claimed that they had made the first football boot with screw-in studs, and that the Germans used them. They had much better grip than the Hungarians, and so they won their first World Cup final 3-2. Now, that has kind of been the consensus and it's been consensus for many years that Adidas then were the first to release a screw-in stud pair of boots. But PUMA then since disputed that. I think it was in 2006 or 8 or something. And they said that they were actually the first guys to do so with the Super Atom back in 1952. And some of the national team players and the Kaiserslautern players who, if I'm not wrong, won the championship that year, the Bundesliga, in 53, that they were wearing the Super Atom that had screw-in studs. So PUMA are claiming that they were first. But no matter who came first, it's a pretty big deal.
So, pardon my ignorance on this, but prior to this, because I know the history of the Super Atom and stuff like that, prior to that, did football boots not have any studs at all?
They did, but they weren't screw-in studs.
So this was
exactly. So they had these. I don't think it was molded studs back then. They were probably just nailed in place. So you had the studs and you just basically put a nail in it, which means that when the studs wore down, you would have a nail sticking out. So not very nice.
So to be clear, at one point, football boots were made out of wood.
Yes, basically.
which is crazy. That's just insane to even think about.
Yeah, and back then, the leather was so hard and so rough that it probably also felt like wood. So boots back then weren't really nice, but it was a big technological breakthrough, and it made. It was a big deal. And back then they also had these like high cut boots, but we're gonna get to that. So let's jump a few years, a couple of decades, and then talk about the Copa Mundial.
Copa Mundial, I think, it's so important because it created the mold for modern football boots, I think, right? It was, you don't look at that boot now and say, wow, that's very streamlined and sleek. But back in the day, in comparison to everything else, that was the Mercurial of its time, if you will. and so many great, amazing players wore the Copas back then. It's a very important product for the industry in terms of solidifying how football boots would be and needed to be from that point forward.
I totally agree. It's like a landmark product, and it's not necessarily that the Copa, was a big innovation at the time. It had just perfected what Adidas have learned over the years, and really, it was such a rounded, well-balanced product that it stood out from everything else back then. Obviously, since we had the first Mizuno Mercurial boot and all that stuff, that did roughly the same but lighter than the Copa. But back then, it was really it was a major thing.
So that's probably the I think people are going to be less interested in that. Fast forward quite a bit, and I think this is where we get into the technologies that matter today. And I think probably in my timeline that I wrote here in no order at all, which is really dumb.
That's I think the best way to do a timeline.
It is the best way to do it. I'm very organized. 1998, the OG Nike Mercurial. No, what do you got?
94.
Oh yeah, 94. I do have that here. It's just not in order. 94.
The perfect timeline, my man. I like how you do it. Can you please come and organize my boot wall? Because that would be total chaos. I would love it.
Oh, totally. I can do that.
Yeah, of course, 1994, the first Predator, because it introduced... it's one of the biggest technological advancements and one of the biggest innovations, because it took, it just took everything and everyone completely by surprise. It threw the rule book out the window and introduced the rubber elements, of course. So that was a very big thing. I think we've talked about the story before with Craig Johnston developing the Predator element. So I don't know how much we should go into it, but in short, he developed this technology from training kids playing football, saying they should put swerve on the ball like they were using a table tennis bat, and they said we can't do it because table tennis bats have rubber and football boots don't. So he developed a football boot that felt like a table tennis bat with rubber. He pitched it to Adidas. They didn't like it. He went to Bayern Munich players. They liked it. He recorded it on video, went back to Adidas, and they loved it. They made the boot. Mm-hmm. History was made.
And obviously that was a very important product, but I think if you look at what's out today, maybe that's not viewed as a super important technology, but think about the popularity. Before speed boots were a thing, power boots focused around striking the ball, that was the most popular style of modern football boot, which is why the Predator series was so successful. Nike launched the T90 Laser series off of the success of the Predator. That was their answer. And I think you can make an argument that maybe at one point the T90 line surpassed the Predator in terms of popularity. Certainly the later years of the Predator before they killed it off. And we can't talk specifically about what's coming, but we've seen some leaks and we've seen some pros training, and it looks like rubber elements might be making a comeback sooner rather than later, which is exciting to see. And it all started back in 1994.
Exactly. And it was just such a, big step towards putting stuff on top of football boots that gave you an advantage, not necessarily, the whole theme back then was 100% legal, 0% fair, which is one of the coolest taglines ever for a football boot. But it was also just it really set the tone for what was to come in football boots, not necessarily just only in power boots, but how to treat an upper and how to add stuff to the upper itself. And I thought in that regard, it was a very visionary thing to do back then.
Yeah, and I think what's also special and what you can say about a lot of these technologies we're going to highlight is it introduced something that not only had we not seen before, but introduced a feel that nothing else had ever provided. And that's what's cool about that piece of technology, which now brings us to 1998, the original Mercurial, which is important because this is a time just right before the 2000s when pretty much every single boot was kangaroo leather. That was the gold standard for high-end football boots. Nobody wanted anything else. But Nike, in their wisdom, introduced a synthetic upper. And the synthetic on the 1998 Mercurial is not like the Mercurials you're probably thinking of. It's more of like it's basically a synthetic leather imitation type thing, right? It's got a little bit of a padded feel to it, but a very shiny, quite frankly, cheap and plasticky outer layer. Synthetics have come a long way, but that was the first one to do it. And I think that boot also maybe deserves a little bit of credit, obviously not a technology, but for just kind of breaking the mold of simple black and white boots.
It definitely did. And yes, we had seen, especially white and also some red boots previously in the 80s. We all remember Alan Ball wearing a couple of white boots. I don't remember the brand, to be honest, and that's a little bit bad on my part. But he did, and but it was like that Nike really took it up a notch with the Mercurials. And speaking of technology, yes, it had the KNG 100. Now that we're talking about technology, the name of the synthetic leather, but it also introduced. And for me, it's equally as important, the bladed outsole and the whole, speed optimized stud configuration that to this day is still one of the, high ranking stud configurations for speed, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, that kind of brings me into my next point, and I'm going to fast forward to the Vapor 1, because I feel like that boot, the synthetic introduced on that product, obviously, again, very different than anything else we had seen before. And it really paved the way for not just the Mercurial series, but speed boots in general, because now we had something that wasn't trying to imitate leather and give you this padded soft feel, which is kind of what people viewed football boots as supposed to provide. And they introduced something that, granted, they were blister machines for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
But it was the sensation of playing barefoot that no other football boot had really ever provided or tried to provide. And that was interesting. But also, speaking of stud patterns, I really feel like the Vapor 1 stud pattern is the first one that really kind of broke the mold in terms of like, a stud pattern doesn't have to be studs along the outside, a support stud in the middle, and 4 at the heel. It not only introduced kind of the bladed shape to an extreme that we had never seen before, but just the positioning of the studs where they based it off of an actual foot rather than this is how a football boot is supposed to be. And I think the feel of that FG stud pattern specifically really changed the perspective of every single brand in terms of, hey, we don't have to make a stud pattern that is kind of a variation of everything else.
Basically a variation of the Copa Mundial that everyone else had been doing. Obviously, Adidas had been doing bladed studs on the Predators. Let's not forget that. But I agree that it was a landmark technology and a landmark, change in mindset that Nike brought. So first, the Nike Skin Upper on the Vapor 1 was obviously a big thing. Well, the first iteration of Nike Skin, because we've had quite a few over the years. It's probably the name that Nike have just handed out to everything. They don't know exactly what to call it. It's just, what is this? It's Nike Skin. But yeah, the synthetic on the Vapor 1, fantastic. And one of the big things was that they also, back then, everything was like put together. It was stitched together, but this was a one-piece upper. And that was absolutely unheard of back then. It helped the boot be, of course, they turned it into a very, very light boot because of the upper, because of the tooling. It was just, all around a very, very innovative, completely unheard of piece of, couple of pieces of technology they'd put together there. So yeah, good shout.
Yeah, just so visually distinctive. Like, people don't remember this, but like back then, you had to if you wanted to see pictures of boots, you had to buy the magazines and see the ads and see the pictures of the players. And I just remember because you'd see pros wearing Vapor 1s side by side with other players wearing normal boots, and they're just so visually distinctive. It just looked like the upper was just sucked perfectly to their foot, and it really did look like the future.
And it was. I mean, I remember seeing some some very, very, very early samples of the first Mercurial Vapor, and it was basically the Mercurial R9 upper on a pair of spikes. So that's what they were looking for, and that's what they wanted to do. It was pretty interesting to see.
Really cool.
Yeah, very, very cool. And then they also took the plate from the from the Mercurial R9, and that put some a very silly, very thin synthetic on top. It's really cool to see, and it just shows that back then they really had a vision of how to push things, and that was very, very exciting. So 2002, landmark year in terms of technology for me, at least. We shouldn't also forget the first split outsole on the Predator Mania, which is, I mean, this year is very, very relevant.
Yes.
It didn't change much, but I mean, it was there.
Yeah, and you know what? It was wait. No, that was definitely first. Yeah, because that was 2000. Yeah. It's the first split sole, and it's also probably, at least in my opinion, the best looking of all time as well. The way they did that design with the stripes flowing underneath, great looking pair of boots.
Like the best split sole, best looking split sole, or just best looking boot ever?
Oh, no, best looking split sole, arguably best looking boot. I really like the Predator Mania. I think that's a great design. All-time great.
Right. It's up there, yeah. It's up there. But the accelerator is better, man. Come on.
You think so? Not for me.
Give it to me. Nah,
not for me.
Okay.
Not for me.
Nah,
this is where I think we're going to be kind of a little bit all over the place in terms of order of technologies.
Yeah, I mean, we could just try and stay chronological and say, 2006 was a pretty big year because of Lotto and the right. Lotto Zero Gravity. It was a big year because of Lotto and the Laceless Zero Gravity, which was obviously once again a completely like out of this world. What are you thinking? What is going on here? Kind of direction they took. But it was just, it was something new and it once again really changed how football boots look and how you perceive what a football boot can be. It wasn't the best thing ever. It wasn't the worst thing ever either, which was actually interesting. And they actually made it work back in the day. And especially, what they learned at Lotto that they could carry down to some of their lace boots with the Zero Plus and stuff that were great lightweight boots. I mean, I remember them fondly, but that's not what we're talking about today. But it was just such a visionary thing, and how they actually managed to do it with the technology in 2006 is still a little bit beyond me.
Yeah, really impressive product. Probably, look, it's laceless tech, which I don't really think has gotten to a point yet where we can say that the laceless aspect of any laceless boot has truly been beneficial to the overall performance. No. I think you can make an argument that the Copa 19 plus, 20 plus, the laceless tech is beneficial to the feel, but not the fit or performance of the product.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of what the Zero Gravity maybe has done better than any other laceless boot. If it fits you properly, I think the lockdown and general responsiveness of that boot was really, really good for a first go at laceless. It was impossible to get on and terrible to take off. And it would...
Yes, it was impossible.
I remember I first got a job at a local soccer store, and they had like one pair left in the clearance. And I'm like, let me try them on. They happened to be my size. And I remember I ripped my socks trying to put them on in the store. And I had to work the rest of the day with like a ripped sock because it was that difficult. But such a clean, sleek looking boot. I mean, I know the Vapor 3 was right around that time as well, and that's a really clean looking design. But the Zero Gravity, in my opinion, from a visual perspective, was right there with it.
Yeah, and it was just, everything that was good about Italian design. It was just so classy to look at. It was fast. And actually a decent football boot.
Yeah.
No two words about it. Obviously, I also just wanted to mention the introduction of the Taitian synthetic used on the Vapor 3. Because it really set the tone for what speed boot synthetics could be in the future. And really, it really went up a notch from the synthetic used on the Vapor 1s and 2s. So cheeky shout out to that.
Definitely. And I guess what's also interesting about the Lotto Laceless introduction is that that's also kind of the boot that killed Lotto's popularity. Like they were already kind of declining because Nike was really coming onto the scene with all of these Mercurial boots. But that was the one boot that really people did not care about, which is so interesting given how popular laceless boots have now become. And I guess you have to give a shout out to the A16 Plus Pure Control, which reintroduced laceless, but obviously with a very different concept going with knitted uppers, which we'll talk about in just a second.
Exactly.
I have fast forward to 2008, 2009.
Yes.
I think Flywire first introduced on the Superfly 1.
Yes. 2009, I think it was.
2009, I believe, is correct. I think technically they got unveiled in 2008, but because of all the hiccups they had with durability, it didn't actually come out until 2009, which is a very interesting story in itself.
Yeah.
But I think that the introduction of Flywire is super important, not necessarily because of like what it is, but I think it's what it does. I think that Flywire made consumers and the industry really value responsiveness and lockdown in a pair of football boots, which I think up until that point, all of the structure had to be built into the material. But that was an attempt by Nike to take a really thin material that was more focused around touch rather than structure. But then they had this secondary component to the upper to add the structure. And I think now we look at almost any football boot and there is a structure element added to the upper, whether it's Adidas stripes made out of a slightly harder plastic or some kind of reinforcement fuse. That wasn't really a thing. Uppers were just one piece of material with some stitching up until that point. And I think that really opened the eyes of the industry to say, hey, we can reinforce the upper in ways that we probably would have never done otherwise.
I think maybe, if we look back at some of the old Preds and stuff and some of the Nike boots from around 98 to 2000s, I mean, they had a lot of stuff that would provide some sort of structural integrity on the sides and provide, I wouldn't say lockdown, but stability, right? But I don't really think that, I don't know, to be fair, but it doesn't strike me as the brands had really thought about responsiveness and lockdown in the way that Flywire brought about. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel that, yes, okay, there might have been elements there, like you say, the Adidas stripes, they will have provided some sort of stability, right? But it wasn't something they actively sought to do or develop. And this is why I feel the Superfly 1 is so significant with Flywire, because the execution might not have been the best and it didn't perhaps work as well as they wanted, but it set the tone for, as you said, introducing this way of thinking that we can actually make super thin uppers if we have some sort of structural element to provide stability. And that really changed the game for speed boots for me a lot.
Yeah, I think it was a no compromise approach, right? Where I think up until that point where it's like, you can have a Mercurial Vapor, it's got a super thin upper, but maybe the responsiveness isn't necessarily going to be there because of how thin the upper is. It's going to lack structure because of the design that we've gone for. Flywire really, I think, allowed them to make the upper as thin as possible, because that was one of the main appeal of the Superfly, is it was the thinnest Mercurial Nike had ever made, but it wasn't going to be flimsy and fall off your feet and sloppy because of this introduction of Flywire technology.
And I also think, that's an important thing, because I never felt that the Vapor 1s or 2s or 3s were sloppy and lacked lockdown, so to speak. I probably wasn't looking for it as much when I was a kid, but I also think it really allowed Nike to shave down the upper package, because obviously when you have a tight-fitting boot, there will be less movement inside of it. So I thought, back then, remembering, I don't think I felt the lockdown was bad. I just felt that, the Superfly took it to a new level, because it would still lock my foot very tightly and because of the shape of the boot. But now we also had this element integrated into the upper that actually actively sought to pressure my foot down on the plate when I pulled my laces tight. So it was like an extra little sprinkle on top of something that actually, for me at least back then, felt very secure.
Yeah, I think it's, regardless of how effective it was at the time and how good it was at the time, because I really don't think the Superfly 1 was a very good pair of football boots. No. I mean, I've told my story about that. I'm not going to go over it. But like Jay, you probably get the same question every time a new speed boot or even a boot that's can be even remotely thought of as a speed boot. One of the number one questions you'll get is it responsive? And that I don't think was a question people were asking prior to the introduction of technologies like Flywire.
True.
Which is interesting.
I totally agree. And it kind of, It was interesting for Nike because maybe unknowingly, they actually helped themselves a little bit when Adidas came a year after with the Adizero, which I guess you also want to talk about.
Yes. Well, I was going to quick shout out to carbon fiber sole plates and the introduction of carbon fiber. But to be fair, I don't think that any of the carbon fiber sole plates we ever got from Nike were genuinely better than what we had before. They were just cool because they were carbon fiber.
They were amazing and they looked awesome. And I was close to writing it down, but I thought, he's going to call me out, isn't he? Because I thought, snappy outsoles have been, a thing for a while. They have been a thing on the Mercurial for a long, long time because they're thin and they're very, they have a good snapback, very responsive. And I don't think really carbon fiber changed that. They maybe just made it better, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I've talked about this before. The amount of carbon fiber in that sole plate was so minimal that I don't think we truly know what a carbon fiber sole plate can be yet because no one's actually made it. But the reason why I wanted to mention that is because...
That's not true, is it? Didn't you have those sneaky, never released? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, C6 did a prototype boot that we were testing out for almost 2 years. And
yeah, it was a long time.
The sole plates that we were coming up with were really impressive. But there were other complications in regards to what the goal was and what the final cost would be. And it's a project that's, I don't want to say done, but it's on the back burner for now.
Right.
But I think what ultimately killed Nike's carbon fiber run, because obviously it's not something that we see anymore, is in 2010 with the introduction of the Adizero Sprint frame. And I also kind of want to give a little bit of credit to the original Morelia Neo from Mizuno, because that was technically 2011, not 2010. Am I right?
Yeah, 11.
Very similar sole plate.
Yeah.
Very similar release dates. Don't think it's a copy, but the concept is the same. And I think what's important about the F50 Adizero is not only that it was extremely lightweight and really emphasized, hey, speed boots shouldn't just be thin, they shouldn't just be responsive, they should also be as light as possible. And the F50 Adizero came out and was so much lighter than anything else available at the time. Like, think about this, the Superfly 2 and the Vapor 6 were the Nike Mercurial competitors at the time, which were a legitimate almost 3 ounces more. Like, you're talking 75 grams heavier than the F50 Adizero at the time?
I have no idea what an ounce is in grams, but it was like 235 grams and the Adizero was like 150. So it was a lot.
It was a significant, I remember picking up a pair of F50 Adizeros for the first time and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, these are incredible. And I was lucky enough to get them when they first came out. And I remember taking them to practice the very first time. And I played with a whole bunch of Portuguese players and they all wore Mercurials for obvious reasons. And I took these out of my bag and I had the purple messy ones, the chameleon color. And I handed them off to one guy and I didn't see them back for an hour because everybody wanted to hold them and feel them and throw them in the air. And it was just mind-blowingly light. And I think from a technology perspective, what Adidas proved is that plastics, the technology in plastics has come such a long way that they can create something that is super lightweight and still strong enough to be a sole plate, but also be a lot less expensive than trying to make a sole plate out of carbon fiber, because ultimately it's a very expensive material, right? So
yeah, and it was super thin.
Important development.
It was super thin. It had structural integrity. It was light. It was fast, and it just complemented the sprint skin upper, which was also super thin and actually very decent. It was just an amazing product. Obviously, Sprint Skin came from the year before in 2009 with the F50i Tuned. It was roughly the same. Not exactly the same, but the idea came there. It was a fantastic boot. I remember getting both the synthetic chameleon, purple F50 Adizero, and then the black electricity leather version of it, and they were in the same box from Unisport, and I got it and I was like, oh man, they only sent me one pair because the weight of the box was fooling me, because the box weighed what one pair would normally weigh. So yeah, it was crazy, and that really again set a new standard for speed boots. And I know we're talking a lot about speed boots here, but that's usually where we find the biggest innovations on technology, right? It's like cars. You can probably talk for ages about this, but try and make it quick. Something, race cars, innovation, blah, blah, blah.
Well, so what's with a race car? What's the goal with a race car? Go as fast as possible, right? And the only way to get faster is to come up with new ideas. And that's really where speed boots have continued to evolve. It's the most popular style of boot. People are super into technology these days. And I think it gives every single brand a lot of freedom to experiment and innovate and introduce things that we've never seen before. So, sprint frame, moving on from there, my timeline's a little out of whack now.
Oh, wow. Now you say.
Yeah, now it is. I want to say
perfect up until now.
I don't think this is a very important technology for its effectiveness, but I do think it's an important technology for proving how much people value the emphasis on technology in modern football boots, and that is Nike ACC technology.
I was gonna guess it. Yeah, I also have it.
Right? The CTR 360 Maestri 3, first one to introduce it. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, Jay, but when they first did the initial ACC pack, and all the boots came out and they had a very specific texture to them that other colorways prior to that did not have.
Right.
That has since gone away, but there was a moment in time where I thought, oh, ACC it's an actual thing. They're doing something that's different and it feels different on the ball. But now it's kind of been skewed into this thing where it's like, is it there? Is it not there? If they don't put the logo, we don't really know. So, but the fact that people care that much about something that is truly invisible at this point blows my mind.
And let's not make this a ACC does the work discussion again, because I know we come from two very different standpoints on whether it works or not. And I think we could bore people to death if we took it one more time. But I remember that too, and I thought back then, listen, this is not gonna work. This is like marketing bull. And then I sat down and I like tried it. I was like, what? Especially with the Vapor 8s, this like insane turquoise, however you say that. Turquoise and orange, like ridiculously bad looking pair of boots. But it was like a super fall-y pair. Anyways, I sat down with it, and the black Volt, like that had the leather-like texture. And I sat down with them and I was like, put water on them and tried to spin a ball. And the ACC one, for whatever reason, maybe it was just a different texture, but it had more grip and I couldn't believe it. So since then I have been like a little bit of I'm cool with ACC, but I don't really see like, just let it go, guys. You've been at it for like 7 years now. Come up with something new.
People love it, and it did spawn we saw Adidas NSG, we saw Griptex from PUMA. Those are the two most relevant ones.
But I mean, again, we talked about what it meant for the business, and it might not have been an important technology in terms of performance, but it's been an important, probably one of the most important technologies, because it really shaped the landscape of how people engineer football boots from there on.
You could almost say that football boots have become about this. Who can have the longest list of tech specs? And ACC is just one more that you can throw on there. And it's really just based on how Adidas and PUMA responded almost immediately. They obviously viewed this as, hey, this is a major selling point to people buying Nike boots. But we need to have something similar.
Did they? Didn't they only introduce like NSG on the X15 or 16? I mean, a good couple of years went by.
Yeah, there was a little bit of lag time until they did respond.
If you think like 3 years is a lot of lag time, I mean, if you were playing Call of Duty with that lag time, you would be, you would still be starting the match and have been killed 3 times before you realized. It's like.
But Jay, don't you think they were probably similar opinion to us, where it's like, there's no way people are going to care that much about something that's invisible.
Probably.
But 3 years on, people still cared.
But why would they do it then? I mean, they've kind of then signaled to the world by not doing something similar that it doesn't work, we don't really care about it. And then they realized it was like, if Nike came out and did laceless stuff now, they would basically be patting Adi on the back and saying, yeah, you guys were innovators and way ahead of us. Like,
but it's a copycat industry, Jay. It's a copycat industry.
I know. Okay, I just don't understand. ACC. I'm going to give it ACC. It's there. It's legit.
It's good. I think It's a proper influential technology.
Yeah, okay. He said it here. It's on record now.
Yeah. So now we are 2013, probably. Nike Hypervenom Phantom 1.
Right.
With Nike Skin
Version
2 or 3
2.
at this point.
Yep.
Is it 2? Yeah. The mesh base upper. And before we talk specifically about that, I do want to give a shout out, and we're traveling even further back now, to the PUMA V106, which had the really nice leather one, but the synthetic version with its textile upper. And I think that's the innovation here, is the introduction of textiles as an upper on football boots, that while the PUMA V106 doesn't go down in history as an amazing pair of boots, not the most durable, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's the first boot to feature a textile or mesh type of synthetic base.
See, I don't think that's entirely accurate, because Adi did something way, way back in the day, like in the 50s or something like that, that was super ridiculous and had a textile upper. I think it was, they talked about it in the wake of releasing the PrimeKnit FS. I think they said it wasn't the Argentina. It was something, it was called something country or city name, but I mean, I don't remember, don't shoot the messenger. But they did back then. But I think in modern times, yeah, Puma were ahead of everyone else.
V106, but then Nike Skin with the Phantom 1, that's an upper that I think blew a lot of people's minds. I think that the general aesthetic of that boot in general was very different in comparison to what Nike had done up until that point.
Yeah.
And look, the way that it fit and feel was great. The performance and the durability, a little bit questionable, especially the earlier colorways.
Yeah.
But the experience of that boot was great.
It's just one of those, I mean, people, even in the comment section today, they still mention how they feel the Hypervenom 1, like the OG upper, was one of the best upper materials and upper executions ever. And it really set the tone for this mesh-based upper that we've since seen on every, from every big brand, basically. Mesh and then a thin silicone coating. I mean, we can take the Lotto Maestro, we can take the X, we can take, whatever can we take? Nothing from Nike at this moment, top boot wise, but you know, Puma have also done it, if I'm not mistaken.
Look, you can make the argument, Jay, that the Phantom 1's Nike Skin upper was the precursor to knitted uppers, right?
Yes.
Pretty well. That was like the foundation of like, oh, this is a concept that works and people really like it. And I don't want to.
I'm unsure though. I mean, I'm not sure you can make that. I mean, I don't want to call you out or anything, but I'm not really, because I thought about the same thing. I was like, yeah, oh man, and it feels like Hypervenom is the first step towards the next big innovation. And I just thought they had an awesome synthetic, and they were like, okay, let's stick it on the Hypervenom and see what flies.
But Jay, how would you look? Let me ask you this: how would you describe, and how is everyone describing the feel of a broken-in Hypervenom Phantom 1?
It's like a sock. So
it's
yes,
like a sock,
I know
right?
what you want to say.
That's kind of my argument with that. So I don't want to stick on that too long. People know the Hypervenom Phantom 1 is great. I think that was an important upper. Quick mention, it's not really super important, but I thought it was a really interesting technology. The gradual stability frame on the Evopower 1, right around that time as well. I thought it was very interesting to have a boot based around barefoot shooting mechanics. And not just the sole plate that bent backwards, but just the entire design of the upper and the logic behind everything that Puma had done, I thought was really cool.
And they actually had, solid university tech behind the whole idea. And it went against everything that had been established in the business so far, that a boot shouldn't be able to bend backwards to make it more powerful. They actually made it go, bend full backwards and bend the foot the wrong way, so to speak. But they had the data to back it up. And I thought it was a brave move, but also an important move, because it repositioned Puma as a brand who dared to go their own separate ways with technology they believe in. And we're going to get back to that in a bit.
Yeah, and that was cool. It was cool just because it was like Adidas was running with the power spine in the later days of the Real Predators, which was specifically designed to do the exact opposite, not let the sole plate bend backwards, because they were claiming that would offer more power in your strike, where Puma came out and said, hey, they're lying to you. It's actually the exact opposite. And here are the studies to prove it. I thought that was really cool. And honestly, I think the mistake with that boot is that they didn't go at Adidas with the marketing.
Exactly. That's what I thought too. Because Adidas, when it came out, all the nerds at Unisport, we were talking about like this just doesn't work. I mean, it's well established among all the boot nerds that the power spine concept and philosophy behind it. This is what works. This is the way to go. This is how to do it. And PUMA just came and said, no, forget it. It doesn't work. This is how we do it.
You know what? Jay, I would argue that's what's missing in football boot marketing these days.
Yeah.
The brands, they don't go at each other anymore. I feel like they once did. They don't do it anymore.
No, and we want some BMG. Wow. That was. We can't be friends anymore after this. BMW, Mercedes kind of, rivalry where they just
the car companies go after each other.
Shots at each other. This is what we need. And there's nothing of that sort anymore.
I am more, Ajay, I don't know about you, but when I watch TV and I see a commercial for a product and they are visibly attacking their competitor, I am more inclined to buy their product just because of that.
Because they actually
their
believe
confidence in their product.
Yeah, they believe in it enough to really have a shot at their rivals and their let's call it rivals because I don't know the word. So moving on to early 2000.
We're going to move on to the final thing on this list for me at least.
Okay. Wow.
I think you have the same thing. What do you have?
I have PrimeKnit.
PrimeKnit.
In 2014 on the PrimeKnit Sambas because that was the first knitted boot. But I want to say Flyknit because Flyknit changed the game, obviously.
Yeah, knitted uppers in general. And I don't think we need to talk about this too much because I feel like I mentioned the Superfly 4 and the Magista Ober 1 in almost every video I make, which it hurts me when I say it because I'm like, oh my God, people are got to be sick of me saying this again. But super important for the industry. And that obviously also introduced mid-cuts, cuts being something that I don't think was played around with too much up until that point. Super Atom, way back in the 50s, technically mid-cut, but football boots back then were actually more boot than anything.
Yeah.
So,
and this is like for modern times, it's the single biggest change in how you see football boots. Like it is, and I might say even ever, this is the biggest change and the biggest shift in direction for football boots with the introduction of knitted uppers. I mean, Nike were first to do it with high-cut boots and should be given a lot of credit, but Adidas were also working on it. We saw that with the PrimeKnit Sambas. They weren't as good and as refined, but it was such a major shift in the whole direction and the line of thought building football boots that of course, it was a massive thing. It changed the way you engineer boots. It changed the way you feel football boots. It changed the way it fits. The marketing around it, everything was just it felt like a big reset. And that 2014 is the biggest landmark, and then we go from there.
Yeah. Also, I think what was kind of secondarily introduced along with knitted uppers and mid-cut designs is one-piece constructions. True one-piece, no more tongue. And that's something that really you're hard-pressed to find a football boot with an actual tongue these days. Everything has gone one piece, whether that's because the brands feel like that's a better way of doing things because you have less overlapping materials, which I agree with to a certain extent, but I also kind of think to myself, it's also probably cheaper for them to do it that way, which might be why they're doing it. But one-piece uppers, another huge technology that's very important in the modern industry.
Absolutely. And so, but this is the thing that those two boots, those two releases, the Magista 1 and the Superfly 4s, they just completely changed everything because they set a brand new agenda for what the brands out there were trying to achieve with their football boots and what has, it felt like the innovation game and the focus on innovation just got jammed up to like 200,000. Because now people really had to think ahead. Okay, what can be the next big game changer? And we haven't seen it yet. We've talked a lot about it, but it was just such a significant move with actually great football boots. It wasn't just pointless, something to show off. They were actually amazing football boots, and they gave people something they had never ever tried before. And that to me is one of the biggest most important things, that it's new, but it works and people will take the technology in and accept it right away.
Yeah, you're right. It was a huge risk, but ultimately paid off and people responded to it extremely well, which is very rare for such a drastic new technology. But to be fair, Nike had a history of doing stuff like that. So if anyone was going to do it, it would make sense that it was them.
Yes. Right. Was that your last entry to the list?
That is my last. Yes. In my list that's completely out of order, yes.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I'll give you some time to search through it and also mention, obviously, the Laceless technology being brought back by Adidas in 2016. Significant because now it wasn't just Lotto. Adidas had joined the game. Obviously, they had Dennis Dekovic in, who had been a part of the Lotto team. He'd been a part of the Nike team going Flyknit, and now he was part of... He wasn't part of the Adidas. He was at Adidas. So that's a bit of a fun story at a stretch maybe. But it's a big move and it really, it paved the way for Adidas's boot portfolio for years and years to come. And I think laceless Adidas boots aren't going to go away anytime soon.
No.
So that obviously was a big move to bring him back. They really went in hard on the knit game as well. So that was a big thing. 2017 Future was introduced with the PUMA Netfit technology. Obviously, again, showing that PUMA are willing to go their own way. It was an important technology to me because it was something that hadn't been done already. I mean, laceless technology, it had been done. Knitted boot, it had been done. What was next that could be a really, really big game-changing innovation for a brand and really take them forward? And Netfit proved to be that for PUMA because the Future really... I mean, the popularity just exploded looking at the Evopower, which it replaced. And Netfit was innovative, it worked, it was new, it was fresh, and it was their proprietary technology, right? It was theirs. They had invented it. They hadn't copied it from anyone. So that was a big thing for me. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to Fusion Skin on the that was introduced on the Copa 20, which I think is probably the new way to work with leather in the future because you can actually fuse and you can use leather as a synthetic. And I think that is really to keep leather boots alive. What brands need to do in the future is to use leather as a synthetic. So also very important.
I think the modern laceless Copa is really, if you thought that leather boots had nowhere else, were nowhere else to go, they have somewhere else to go.
Oh yeah.
And also, I don't have it written down, but we kind of glanced over the CTR 360 line.
Yep.
And I think that was a very important line, not so much for the Kangalite synthetic it introduced was great. The introduction of memory foam in the upper, cool idea. General aesthetic of the boot, the way it was designed was interesting, but just the concept of control boot, which is something that's still around today. And I think an emphasis in a lot of marketing. I think that as a technology, if you want to call it, was pretty important.
I'll take that. I'll take that. Now, Josh, I think we have rounded up our timeline, right? It's somewhat in order, chronologically at least. We might have forgot. I don't think we've forgotten much, but if we have, you can leave us a comment shouting at us with emojis in the comment section right down below. Now, what we can also use the comment section right down below for, and this transition is absolutely fantastic. I know it. Thank you, guys. Is down there, you've written us a lot of questions, and now we're going to answer some of those questions in the last couple of minutes that we have left. Josh, should I just hit you with the first question?
For it.
So this question is from Michael Chukma. What an awesome name. Hi, James and Jay. I'm kind of a hardcore Mercurial X Speed Boot guy, and I'm debating between getting the PUMA 1 5.1 and the PUMA King Platinum. What do you think is the better boot? What I would like better? And it's a funny thing, here we have this Mercurial X guy who's only looking at PUMA boots. I kind of like that, so big up for that. Which boot would you take if you are a speed boot kind of guy?
And I don't know if you're going to agree with me, and I quite frankly don't really care. But I honestly,
hostility.
I honestly think that the PUMA King might be more pure speed boot than the PUMA 1. The PUMA 1 because of the way they designed the back area of the boot, the way the lacing system actually does come up a little bit higher than the average boot, there's a sense of bulk to me with the Puma One, even though it's not a bulky product, where the Puma King Platinum just seems more sleek and streamlined and fast to me, even though it's not as responsive. So I think in terms of like overall outright performance, the Puma One's probably better, if not is better, 100%. But for me, I don't know. I like the Puma King.
I accept and I hear what you say. I would probably, for me, I'm also like a very responsiveness lockdown kind of guy. So for me, that is the top thing that I look at first. And in that sense, I would say the Puma One. Simply because, you know, the outside of the boot feels more stable, and the lockdown is pretty good for a boot that has a leather forefoot. And I feel compared to that, the King is a little more sloppy, but I also agree with what you're saying that it does feel more like a speed boot because of the silhouette and the fit. I would probably take the One. But to be fair, if you want something with leather, I'd go and pick up a pair of made in Indonesia Mizuno Mercurial 2s. Just saying.
Cool.
For the same amount of money.
We totally did not help that guy.
I did. I was like, go pick up a pair of Mizunos.
You recommended 3 different boots.
Right. Okay, so you can recommend one boot. What do you say?
I think if he wants a leather speed boot, you're right, the Neo 2.
Gotcha. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So, Galfer, what do you think about the Nike Super Ligeras? For me, it was the best speed leather boot ever, staying in the same speed leather boot realm here.
I always thought they were cool looking. Were they available in Europe, or was it only Asian markets?
They were, I think, the first couple of generations.
You're right,
ones
they were.
And the twos.
At least the first generation was, because I remember the
twos and threes.
white, silver, and blue ones.
Oh, yeah. And the black, white, and golds. Absolutely amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
I liked them. I felt they were very good. Had a slightly long toe box and it felt almost like a clown shoe to me because it was so long. I didn't particularly like that, but it had a low toe box. It was, if I didn't mention it, it was very light. The outsole wasn't to my taste. I didn't feel it was aggressive enough, but it gave a different option to the Jumbo, which means that I actually like the Super Ligeras more. It probably couldn't, I don't think it could compete with some of the modern leather speed boots that we see today. But it's still a boot I hold in very high regard.
Yeah, I think they were good boots. I think they looked great. Every single generation was really good looking boot. And I think if you wanted like a modern take on that, because I don't think Nike does not do that boot anymore. I think the Puma King Platinum is probably the closest thing to that.
Yeah. It's fair because it's light. It's a little in between, you know, being a real speed boot and just feeling like a leathery speed boot, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but you know what? Even Nike Premier 2 is not too far off that concept.
Okay. I wouldn't go anywhere near calling the Premier 2 a speed boot like feel.
No.
I know where you're going at. I don't see it for me. But upper wise, yeah, okay. But yeah, okay. Okay. I have an absolutely brilliant question here from a guy called Adam Steves. Jesus, I'm getting blind here. But it's a very long question, and it's actually it's a pretty good question. So maybe we should take that in the next episode because we're not going to have time to answer this. So I'm just going to take one more, and that is from 2 seconds. Wow. Similingan, hey Jay, Quan, and JayMike. Sorry, guys. Please let me know if there are any speed boots out there for very wide-footed people. I hate it that speed boots are always narrow, as if wide-footed people are slow as a fridge. And I thought this way of, putting it was hilarious because he's got a point. Why are speed boots always so narrow-fitting?
I think the narrower you can pinch the midfoot, the faster the silhouette ends up looking, right? You want something that is sleek.
Yes.
Right? You want that sleek. You want the tightness. I also think that if you're emphasizing weight, this slimmer you can make the boot, the less material you're going to have to the upper. Therefore, you're going to end up with a lighter product.
Right. I'm with you. But he has a problem. How do we fix it?
I think a good wide foot speed boot option would be, I think both Pumas we just talked about. I think the Puma King Platinum's not terrible. I think the Puma 1 5.1, not terrible. Once you've broken them in a little bit. The thing is, if you do legitimately have a wide foot, it's very difficult to buy a pair of football boots that are going to feel perfect right out of the box. You're always going to have some kind of stretch. And I like the Puma options because they are leather and they are going to stretch a little bit as you wear them in. I think...
But depending on how wide of a foot he has, I mean, it can be really difficult. Because I was thinking like X is, I mean, you can stretch the upper, you can fit a relatively wide foot in there. You can also, wow, that was a weird way of saying, you can fit a wide foot in there. You can take a Nemesis. It's not really a speed boot, but it can give you like the feel of a speed boot. You can also take the Phantom Venom, which has good width to it, and it has aggressiveness in the and good responsiveness in the blade because of the blade studs and it's very stiff, but it's not a speed boot, right? I'm just thinking like,
but you know what, Jay? I think what needs to be clarified is what he defines a speed boot as, right? Because what I've found in answering a lot of people with this same problem is when I ask them more about what they are actually looking for, their emphasis is more so on the weight of the product more than anything.
Great.
And pretty much every modern top-end boot is pretty light.
Yeah.
Then some speed boots are a little bit lighter, but just because it's branded as a speed boot doesn't necessarily make it the lightest possible option out there anymore.
No.
Like a Nike Tiempo Legend 8 Elite is light.
Oh, yes.
Even though it's not a speed boot, right?
No,
it's really not far off the Mercurial, even though it might not look like that's the case. So,
right. I get you. I get you.
Yeah. I just think wide feet in general, something with a leather upper. I know it's not really a true speed boot thing, but I think if you're truly struggling, that's always the best option from a comfort perspective.
I agree. I agree with you. Some people would say Puma Future. I don't feel it's a speed boot at all. But you know, we are talking. You have to make compromise when you have like like a boat of a foot. You can squeeze into the Mercurial. I wouldn't recommend it, but I'd probably go Phantom Venom, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a solid option
see if
as well.
you can do your body and your feet and your brain and your overall happiness in life a big favor and find the Mizuno Wave Cub Legends, because you'll be able to squeeze into those and they're the best thing known to man. So yeah, you're welcome. Now go and find them. Nah, I take the Venoms. I take the Venoms. And I think with those words, we round off, for me, very, very interesting episode of the Bootnerds podcast. I love talking tech. It's the best thing ever, especially tech that has been that we can then talk about and pat on the back and criticize. And it's been fantastic. And the last note, Josh.
Nobody has messaged me yet about your boots. So again, if you found JayMike's Nike ID Superflies and you're out there, get in contact with us. Leave a comment down below. I'm willing to make a good offer. I know they're going to pop up eventually. I'm just waiting for the day.
Probably. I look forward to that day. I just want to see what they look like so I can actually have peace in my mind that they look better than yours. And with those words, guys, if you've had a good time with the Bootnerds podcast, don't forget to leave a like there. Don't forget to go subscribe to the podcast by clicking the bubble in the middle of the screen. Go subscribe to Josh. Go subscribe to Unisport. It's all good and fun and games. And finally, leave your questions in the comment section right down below. And with that said, I am JayMike and I approve this message. Can you
See you later.
Bye.